Our primary mission here at Alternate Media is to bridge the gap between Judaism and Christianity, as it's existed for far too long. Yeshua, as we know, never intended to start a new religion. He was a religious Jew.
I think at a certain point in every believer's life where we think, isn't there more?
There has definitely been a need within the church. That's something that a lot of Christians are searching for. A lot of Christians know that there is something missing in their faith. What indeed is intended to fill that is Judaic roots of the faith.
The New Testament is very clear about bridging the gap between Jew and Gentile, and we're just returning that mission back to the modern day.
Hello and welcome to another Alternate Media special. We're kind of doing things on a different night tonight, but that's because this is when we were available. So tonight we'll be reviewing the debate between Sean Griffin from Kingdom and Context and Courtney Smith from Biblical Apologetics that was held and hosted on the Church Splits YouTube channel and moderated by none other than the illustrious Will Hess.
What's up, guys?
How are you doing tonight, man?
I'm doing awesome. As per the usual, appreciate your flexibility. My availability has been difficult as of late, so I appreciate you making this work out so we could do this.
Absolutely. Thank you for making the time to be on to do this. I've done a number of other debate reviews, and this one's going to be a little bit different from my normal style. Because I jumped at the opportunity to be able to have the moderator on with me for the debate review.
Absolutely. I actually have wanted to do so many debate reviews. I just haven't been able to, as far as my time allowance is concerned. Debate is a passion of mine. It's something in the very near future. I'm hoping within the next year, I'm actually going to be able to start participating in formal debates online. Like what we witnessed on the Church Split, where you've participated in a couple of them as well. Yep. So I'm looking forward to it. Debate's a passion, and it's not an easy skill. So whenever I give constructive criticism, that's what it's intended to be, is constructive. It's never meant to be brutal or mean, unless, of course, you're particularly egregious, in which case I will definitely be a little bit mean.
Absolutely. And that, I would say that generally is the goal with my debate reviews also, is even though I will typically agree more with one side than the other, I do try and be objective, and maybe I'll get a little bit more impassioned when somebody makes an absolutely ridiculous point. And that's I think what gets me the most, is I get mad at bad arguments.
Same. Yeah, that gets under my skin quite a bit whenever that happens. So I was very happy to host the debate between Courtney and Sean on the topic of, is penal substitution or penal substitutionary atonement biblical? And anyone who knows me up to this point knows I have a very particular interest in that topic. And so for me, when I was asked to moderate this, I jumped at the opportunity, because I'm like, I like to watch the world burn, so let's do this. And I'm excited for it. It'll be interesting to review this, because I had a lot of thoughts in the debate. I was writing some of them down even throughout the debate, which is funny because you'll even see me like putting it on there, like texting and stuff on there.
Right.
So yeah, it'll be interesting. So first off, I know, and I don't want to get into any of the me and Seamus are bros. Like we're tight. We're like, it's one of those weird friendships that was built through the podcasting world.
Yes.
And it was one of those, there's certain people I've like become acquaintances with. There's people I'm like, no, we are friends. And that's how I feel about you and Seamus. And one of the things is that I don't want to get too much into it. But I do know that there was bad blood between you and Courtney in the past. And it was one of those things where I was like, well, which I was asked to moderate this. I was like, ooh, but I'm like really good friends with these guys, but I'm willing to do it. But also at the same time, like I've mentioned, I was like, just so you know, I'm really good friends with them. I'm not here to pick a side in anything. Like I'm going to, but yeah, it was funny. So anyhow.
Right. Yeah. And honestly, when I heard that it was happening, I actually got kind of excited because I knew that I wouldn't agree with either of their positions.
Same.
And so I was like, all right, this is going to be a cool debate to watch. Like it'll be interesting, and it will legitimately be interesting.
Literally have no dogs in this fight.
Right. Yeah. So like it gave me the opportunity to really truly just objectively decipher, okay, who's making the better argument here, because like I don't agree with either of them, but who is making a better argument? Well, I mean, that's kind of what we're here to discuss a little bit tonight.
Right. And it seems like the general consensus from the audience, like in comments and whatnot, a lot of people seem to think that Sean won. There are some people who, of course, are in the contrary, who believe that, like, basically Courtney girl bossed her way through it, which more power to her. And my audience was confused. So I have a general consensus that Sean's YouTube channel is quite a bit larger than Courtney's platform, so I think that's also where you're going to see more of that come in, right? Because there's also a ratio to consider. But the other thing is, like, my audience is either penal, substitutionary, atonement, standard Protestants, evangelicals, or they're like me who don't think it's accurate. And so it is funny because my audience though was definitely like, what? This is weird. So it was definitely an odd debate for me. I have no ill will against either one of them, but there were definitely some things that we'll talk about.
Now, here's the question, because you have even recently made a post on Facebook acknowledging this same thing, which I would agree. I think Kingdom in Context is probably a larger YouTube channel, but I'm not sure who has the larger TikTok channel. I actually haven't even checked to see who has the numbers there. I didn't even know that Kingdom in Context was on TikTok for a little while until I think that somebody tagged them in a comment in something that I posted once, and I was like, oh, they're on TikTok. Cool.
Cool.
But yeah, that will be a huge determining factor in the crowd reception, I think, because a lot of the crowd that we get from these debates comes directly from the advertisement on TikTok and kind of the back and forth that the interlocutors will have prior to the debate that happens on TikTok.
And that's actually, you mentioned something interesting there. So first off, I do plan to get more involved on TikTok because that is taking over in many areas. I've slacked on the church split TikTok. Sorry, anyone who follows us, if you think we still exist. Like, did they delete their TikTok? No, I'm just lazy. But the thing that you mentioned that's interesting is the back and forth that can happen on TikTok prior to the debate. Because that's really what engaged the debate. I logged onto TikTok, which I very rarely do. I'm not on TikTok very often. And suddenly I'm tagged in this comment section and people are asking me to moderate this debate. I'm like, what is even happening? I don't even know. I barely even knew who Sean Griffin was. And I was not familiar with Courtney's work at all. But I knew Sean Griffin's name by Kingdom in Context. I was like, that's what I knew. And so I agreed to do it, and I kind of looked up some of their stuff, and it was one of those things I agreed to, and I was like, sure, let's just rock this thing out. Like, let's just do it. I don't even know you guys, but sure. And some people might say that was foolish, but for me, I say it can be a good time no matter what. But one of the interesting things that I think, and this will probably come up later, but you can tell in this debate as well, there was previous history leading up to this debate, and I think sometimes that bad blood came through too much. And that some of those things were too much kind of depended on in the debate for that background knowledge instead of building it from the ground up. But we'll get into all that.
Right. And yeah, no, I think I can definitely agree on the build up. There's a decent level of playful jab here and there, but I remember for the debate that Seamus and I did with the Black Doctor 21 and Buck Rogers 298, we set up the debate and pretty much went no contact with each other until debate night. We weren't tagging each other in TikToks to try and instigate each other. We just kind of advertised that the debate was happening, and then debate night we we had it out on the debate floor. And I'm glad it went that way, because given how that debate went with those considerations, I think it could have been a lot worse if we had been actually more engaged with one another prior to.
Absolutely. So maybe, and that's something I learn as I do this too, because I want to host more debates. And so for me, I'm like, oh, maybe from here on out, it's like if I agree to do a debate, we agree go radio silence and stuff like that. So I'm also learning as a moderator as I go through. So I appreciate anyone's grace there. So yeah.
Absolutely. Before we get like deep into the video, because we're going to bring the video up here in a minute, I know something that probably is important to address is your moderation style, which you and I tend to have a similar moderation style. I found that out with the last debate that I moderated, which was my first time moderating. So it dissatisfies a lot of people, because it seems like we actually take kind of a backseat and we don't do a whole lot of moderating. But there are reasons for that. Go ahead and explain some of why it may seem that way.
Right. So now that's the thing is, so when I first started the church split, it was all about I was very much about like, let's discuss difficult topics, but then also let's not be afraid to have very long form conversations that flow and are uninterrupted. Because a lot can come out in a conversation when that's happening. Either if it's an interview, I didn't want it to be heavily edited. I wanted people to be like, I go on the church split. They don't edit me out of context. It's a long form conversation. If it takes me an hour or 2 hours or 2.5 hours, or if you're like when we had Brenda with God is Gray, 3 hours, so whatever it takes. So in my mind as a moderator, and there's plenty of like universities that do the very formal moderation where the moderator is very much keeping everyone on guardrails. And there's probably a place and time for that. Okay. But that's not what I want my platform for. This happened with your guys' debate versus the Black Doctor and Buck Rogers. People were frustrated that I didn't jump in, but some very key elements came out during that debate that I don't think would have come out if I had interjected. A good example of this during that debate, because for those who do not know, the topic of the debate was, are we under like the Torah, right? Do Christians still have to follow the Mosaic law or the Torah, or however you want to word it? And in the middle of that debate, things were going back and forth. You and Seamus were staying very on the rails. But once it seemed like you guys kept like kind of deflecting at every turn, this Buck Rogers actually snaps and he calls you guys basically blasphemers. Actually, he uses the term blasphemers in the debate. And for me, that exposes a lot about the interlocutor, because the situation was allowed to get to that point where someone showed their true thoughts about something, and they said something they probably wouldn't have otherwise said if it was being very guarded. And so people go, well, why would you want that? I'm like, because you need to know who's the honest interlocutors and who are not honest interlocutors. And if someone is blocking you off constantly while you're trying to have a conversation, or they snap like that, it shows they're not objective. And it shows that they're arrogant, or it shows that their position or their study is so weak that you probably shouldn't take them too seriously. Because if you're really confident what you're talking about, you're not going to snap like that. You're not going to get overly condescending. You're not going to get overly persnickety. I'm okay with a playful jab. I'm okay with a few gotchas, but there's a difference between, that sort of thing, like that can happen in a debate for rhetorical strength versus outright what I would say misbehavior in a debate.
Right.
So my point is I tell time, and then I let them go. When I say it's open discussion, I mean this is your time to be as uninterrupted as possible. And I want you to notice something as well in that debate. There was a few times, like at the very beginning, I could tell we were going off the rails, and I did try to bring up a question from Idol Killer to bring it back a little bit on rails. And Sean basically said, no, let's move forward. I want to answer her question and then we didn't get to audience questions until much later. So once I noticed that there was really no interest in that sort of thing, I just let it go. And I think it actually revealed quite a bit.
Absolutely. And we actually will be viewing, because we're not going to watch the whole debate. It's a 2-hour debate, guys. It's over 2 hours, right? So we're not going to watch the whole thing, but we're gonna go over some select parts that kind of give you a good beef of what the middle of the debate was like. And that what you're referencing, I believe, is part of some of the timestamps that I've selected here.
Very good.
So yeah, real quick before we get in, who do you have with you in spirit, sir?
I have a beer barrel bourbon, BBB. It's made by, if anyone's familiar with New Holland Brewing or Dragon's Milk, they actually have a distillery as well now. And this is one of their bourbons, and it's fantastic. Really enjoy it. A friend of mine picked it up recently. We had a what we call the vinyl and vibe night. We pulled out our vinyl players, pulled out our favorite records, like a bunch of little hippies.
I like it.
And we just chilled. And Breaking Ben was definitely one of the vinyls, just so you know. I know you're a big fan.
Yes.
We played the Aurora album, so I knew you'd enjoy that.
Yes. Actually, so my wife and I will be going to see them Monday night.
Nice.
Yeah, a week from now. Yeah, they're going to be playing with Disturbed and Ginger. So I will also hopefully get to see David Draymond sing Sound of Silence live, and that'll be an experience.
That's awesome. By the way, I just pulled it up so I can see the live chat. So apologies, guys, for not seeing that chat originally.
Yeah, I almost posted up this one. This is somebody, and this is why we did the debate, right? Is that somebody came around to Torah observance because of that debate, so it served its purpose.
Or I like the one underneath it. That's one heckling us in the comments, screaming heretic. Thank you.
Yeah,
guys. You guys are fun.
Yep. I guess also an apology is owed, right? Because I know that you get tagged so much on TikTok to moderate debates, and it's predominantly from the Torah observant community. And that's because I think after hosting that debate, people got the idea that you were friendly to that position. And so now everybody's just like, oh, he's the guy to moderate the debate.
I mean, I am friendly to that position. I have no problem with my Torah observant friends. In fact, you already know this. I've already shifted quite a bit in my own views of the Torah. So you guys have been a large play at that. So I am very friendly to the Torah community. It is just funny how many times I get tagged in these things with beef. And I'm like, bro, I don't have time to moderate all y'all's debates. Like, I love you guys, but no.
All right. So we're going to open up the debate here. We're not going to be going over the opening statements just because those were both like 10 minutes apiece. That's going to be 20 minutes worth of video watching. So if you could summarize what the opening statements were, in the way that I saw the opening statements, essentially was Courtney opened up and began describing a penal substitutionary atonement.
Careful.
That was not penal substitutionary atonement. Right.
Yeah.
Hence the title with the question mark at the end is because it wasn't.
Yes. So one of the things you'll notice if you watch the debate is, now I did appreciate her. She was very clear and concise and precise in her opening statement. I will say that she was very clear what her terms meant and what they were. I actually re-listened to it today, and I was still going, yeah, that's actually a really pretty solid opening statement. But she does redefine PSA to a degree. For those who do not know, PSA is penal substitutionary atonement. Okay, we're using slang because it's way too much verbiage. And she basically pulls the NT right with it. NT right kind of defines it similarly, which is like penal, meaning that there's some sort of penalty incurred, not that God punished him, but that he experienced a penalty of sorts. Substitutionary, that it was done in the place of, and atonement, of course, making us back in fellowship with God. And then she talks about a vicarious side of it, which vicarious means like as well in the place of, or in the place of another, like, or on behalf of somebody else. And again, for those who do not know, I am writing a book on the atonement. Like this is a literal pet topic of mine. It's an obsession of mine, because once I discovered that penal substitutionary atonement was wrong, at least as far as I'm concerned, it broke my brain and it became an absolute obsession. So, plus, because I also mentioned that I just don't believe it's true, I was called a heretic by James White and all other large, like gigantic apologists. And I was like, okay, fine. I'll explain myself. I'll write a book. So now with that said, penal substitutionary atonement traditionally has always taught that God punished Jesus in the place of sinners to satisfy his wrath and make him propitious toward us. That was the point of penal substitutionary atonement. So N.T. Wright and Courtney both redefine the issue. And I've said it 1,000 times. If penal substitutionary atonement simply meant that Jesus suffered in some way a penalty, and penalty can be either a punishment or it could be like a disadvantage, right? Like if he suffered some form of a disadvantage due to being in the flesh, then sure. I don't think many people would argue that point.
Right.
Being killed and crucified is a pretty big disadvantage. But that's not what penal substitutionary atonement historically is. Or I know what, if you want to redefine a historical term, I guess go ahead. But for me, I just muddles the waters even further. So she does redefine it. Then on the flip side, you have Sean. What were your thoughts about Sean's opening statement?
So Sean, I thought, began with a bit of a, so it seemed a rather basic technique, but it works, which is ultimately to just give a concise history of where atonement theory started and the many faces that it took from different people who added their own spin to it until it reached PSA. And that his point obviously was to illustrate that this is an idea that was developed over time and not inherently derived from the Bible from the get-go, which this is something that even you're familiar with, is a lot of it goes back to, Augustinian theology.
Yep.
So I like it works, but it doesn't exactly rule out how it could be biblical. Like you set the precedents that men laid the groundwork for it, but these men did read the Bible for themselves, and so they believe that they've derived it from the Bible.
Correct. And so I did enjoy the fact that he actually at least did a presentation of the history of, because knowing the history of something, I mean, you guys know this as people who are Torah observers, so that knowing the history of something really can help bring out the errors in the thought process or the influences of it, right? And then, so continuing along that line of thought, he then moves into kind of a rapid fire of scripture. And he just starts going this, and I'm going to just say Melchizedek. I'm not going to do the whole Melchizedek. Okay, like I'm going to mess that up. All right,
say it how you need to.
Melchizedek. All right, I'm an American. Whatever. What do you want from me? And I'm not very good in Hebrew. But with the whole, and he was really focused on the priesthood element of Yeshua's death, burial, resurrection, and the idea of him taking the mantle of Melchizedek. And I appreciated that, but I also don't think in the opening statement it got fleshed out enough for him to say that he, in his opening statement, countered why penal substitutionary atonement was incorrect.
Right. It almost seems like a position that could still technically work within the confines of penal substitutionary atonement.
That was exactly what my thoughts were like in the opening statement. I was like, okay, but I could easily see if I brought forth a lot of those same passages and thoughts, a lot of people would be like, oh yeah, I agree with that. There was also a large focus on other parts like the cross, and he did talk about no human sacrifice in the opening statement. I thought that was actually really good because that's starting to challenge and undermine the penal substitutionary atonement view. But I felt like that could have gone forward, because there could have been better, because there is a thing with opening statements. Opening statements, the whole point of them is to establish your position. And Courtney's job was to establish her position as pro PSA, and his job was to say, I'm against PSA, and here's the basic reasons as to why.
Right.
Period. And I don't feel like that. I feel like actually she did a pretty good job there, and I don't feel like he undermined her, like presented a viable enough position. Mainly, maybe he had more planned. He did go over time. I allowed him to try to finish his thought, because that's the other thing with me as a moderator. I will let you go over a little over time if it seems like you're landing the plane, just because I'd rather you finish your thought than not, because again, long form conversations is my passion. And I eventually had to cut him off, because I was like, every time I think it's landing, it's not landing.
Right. And yeah, that I think it probably caught him off guard that he was now having to combat a position on PSA that is not the traditional position on PSA. So it seemed more like he prepared an argument against the traditional view of PSA. And so maybe he might have felt like the goalpost was shifted on him, but that's maybe his fault for not looking enough into Courtney's position. Because I'm sure that she's got content explaining her position in more depth that could have been looked into.
Correct. Although her position is a weird hybrid, and it does for me as someone who studies this religiously, pun intended. I do think that her position confuses many categories, and I already told her this. Like I previous to the debate, I was like, "Hey, Courtney, just so you know, I am not on your side on this. Like, I have nothing against you, but I am." That's actually why she said she wanted me to do it, because she knew I wasn't pro PSA. But what was funny, though, I should actually mention this. I was also warned previously before the debate. Like, my audience kept messaging me going, "Watch out for Sean." And I was like, wow, that's weird. Like, I don't know Sean. I know nothing about him. But apparently he had a reputation of like either ambushing people on their own channels or grossly misrepresenting people, is what the general consensus was. I don't know. I'm not as familiar with his work, but I was warned previously. So I was kind of confused as to how this debate was going to go. I'm like, I don't agree with her position, but if what everyone says about him is true, then it's going to be kind of funny, because I'll disagree with his character and the way he goes about things, but I'll disagree with her position. And it was just, I don't know, it was weird. I was just curious as to how it was going to go down. So just throwing out some fun fact behind the scenes information there.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's actually becoming a little bit more common in new up and coming pro Torah channels and individuals. Is this idea of, inviting somebody to have a friendly discussion and then ambushing them with a debate that they clearly were not expecting and didn't spend time preparing for. So it's yucky in my opinion, and I don't support it, but it's unfortunately something that exists out there. So anyway, let's bring up the actual debate, and we'll go through. So we're starting at a point where they've both made their opening statements, and this is their rebuttals that we'll be watching through real quick. So I think probably we'll watch Courtney's and break, talk a little, and then watch Sean's, break, talk a little, and we'll go from there.
Let's do it.
All right. Tell me if you can hear it, because I've sometimes this doesn't work.
Is what we're going to do from here is we are going to go ahead and start. Both of you guys will have a 5-minute rebuttal, and then we get to some cross-examination. Okay. All right. So Courtney, 5-minute rebuttal starting whenever you start.
All right. So I was not aware that we would be bringing slides. So sorry, there was no slides prepared. With that being said, I did not hear what Sean actually subscribes to. Now, it doesn't mean that one absolutely has to subscribe to a quote man-made doctrine, but I would submit to you that no matter what Sean says, it's going to be man-made, with that meaning that if Sean doesn't subscribe to any of the theories he put on screen, that means he has created a new theory that he needs to tell us all about. And then he would need to substantiate how that is found in the Bible. again, remember my charge in my opening statement. I charged Sean to be able to prove, one, how PSA is not biblical, and two, how his own personal, which is what I think he's presenting here, theory of atonement, where Christ is currently in heaven slitting animal throats, is biblical. Okay. And again, remember, I said more than just vague implications, because I don't even see outside of the Hebrew Bible, which Sean appeals to, and I'm fine with that, but Sean appeals to that. I see no reason to see without a shadow of a doubt that we have a example of Christ where we know it is absolutely fundamentally Christ who is in heaven sacrificing animals currently on your behalf here on earth. Sean brought up a few slides, although he did not actually mention the scriptures where they could be found. He put them on screen and he blazed through them rather quickly. Like Genesis 4, he said that represents Melchizedek. The only thing in my mind that Genesis 4 would represent is that you see people giving offerings. For some reason, I think he appeals to that to say that there was offerings given before Levi. I think we can all acknowledge that that was so. Again, we still need proof as to how the Levitical standards, the parameters in which the Levites were given by God to operate in, is now superimposed onto Melchizedek, which essentially just means my king is righteous, or king of righteousness. So we would need to actually actively have a discussion on what he thinks righteous or righteousness is, and how he would interpret the etymology of that word. In Isaiah 53, I believe I've seen on one of his, again, he didn't state the actual passage. He just kind of said what he interprets those passages as on the side of the slide here. Isaiah 53, he said after. I heard him stress after, but I would wonder what Hebrew word he's using to validate that, because I can pull up the Hebrew currently right now and I see no rendering that would give way to his interpretation in my mind that he's trying to lend to suggest that Christ had to die in order to make it to sit at the right hand of God to then do the mediating, as opposed to understanding the mediating was done when Christ died. So he says that the Torah does not state that humans should have to be put on a cross to die, right? I would submit to you that in the Torah, it actually mentions in Deuteronomy 21. Now, very clearly, I want you to hear me. Deuteronomy 21:22, where Paul makes reference to in Galatians 3:13, with regards to cursed is anyone who hangs on a tree. And we know for a fact that Christ took that curse. I do believe that Sean understands it that way. However, he somehow then uses that passage to state that each one of us has to be bound by the same treatment that Christ was in order for PSA to be valid, which again, if he would have maybe listened to my opening statement a little more, hopefully I'll hear it in the rebuttal as to why my rendering of PSA is inaccurate and why he would even make that statement. He mentions Hebrews 5, and he actively notes that Hebrews 5, there are passages that people that may not agree with his understanding, where it actively mentions like the blood of Christ and how the blood and the covenant are linked together, and how he would say that that means purity, and how it means just that he was pure, he was obedient, and therefore that's what gained his access to God. And while I do believe that that is what gained access to God, again, that is the mediation part that's already done, and we're waiting for our king to return. So he says the Father tells
30 seconds.
What the Levites should do, right? Actively, again, the Levites, not Melchizedek. And Psalm 89 seems to give us a slight rendering on what the Father would put on the tribe of David, i.e. the king line, that could happen, which is that whips and lashes would be how he treated him. Now, we know that this was not ever done to any Judaic king other than Christ. So there's a lot we could get into here, and I hope that we do. And I hope that he answers some of my questions in the rebuttal, and then the cross-examine, we will get into that.
All right. Thank you, Courtney.
All right. Thoughts, my friend?
I got a few. So right off the bat, with the response, first off, to clarifying the slide situation, I was messaged by Sean during her opening statement asking if it's okay he uses slides. And I was like, oh, that never even occurred to me. Sure, why not? And Courtney took offense to that, and expressed later on to me that she felt like it was giving him an advantage because it looks, it's cleaner. While you're saying the word, just seeing them emphasize it just makes it more convincing. Which for me, and here's my issue a little bit with that. And I did express this to Courtney afterwards. I did tell her, I was like, it makes it, but when you object to it like that, as well, it does come off like you're weaker, like you instantly feel insecure. Personally, if somebody whipped that out in front of me, I just would keep on trucking and just be like, all right, whatever, you can use slides, you're going to need them.
Right. Present the information and let the information be its own defense.
Right, exactly. And in fact, if they use slides, you can make notes easier to attack your opponent's position. So you're like, oh, thank you for writing it down for me. So that, to clarify that. And then later on, this is where I kind of was like, it was one of those rocks in a hard place, right? Clearly you have one opponent that is not fond of it. And then you have one opponent that wants to use it. And then Sean was like, I have it. In the next part, it's like, hey, I have it locked in there if you want to use it. And I was like, and he's like, well, and I didn't even say yes or no because he just kind of kept going. He said like he was on a roll. Again, let them talk if they're talking. Right. And then he goes, and well, since we're not going to bring it up. And then he just kept going. I was like, well, you didn't really let me respond or ask Courtney if she'd be okay. If you did that, you just kind of kept going. And I'm not going to interrupt you, but unless I actually have to, that. But so that right there, I was like, okay, so it felt like Sean was being petty at that point. And then at this point, I felt like he just was like, all right, I'm done with slides. And then till the end, then he goes, oh, well, can I use my slides? And I'm like, okay, you already said in the middle, you're not going to, like you kind of conceded it. And now you're just trying to bring it back. And that kind of caused a whole other hair raising situation where she started combating back and forth. And so for me, it just felt really petty. I don't know, like it felt petty in both areas where it's like, well, let me just keep pushing the thing that I know is making my opponent uncomfortable. And then also let me just push back on this because I felt like I was at a disadvantage when really you could just as easily combat the situation if you think that their position is that absurd. So my first thoughts were on that is okay right there. Because I was like, that was a lot of drama over slides.
For me, when it got to that point, definitely thought the same thing. Now it makes sense because I've watched both Sean and Courtney before, and both of them are very posture-based debaters in different ways, and by that I mean so Courtney especially is very fond of, as I gather, Dr. Michael Brown. Dr. Michael Brown is one of the most posture-based debaters that I've ever watched. He is somebody that he won't really present an argument, but he'll position himself and act like he's winning the debate the whole time, even if in the weeds of all the words that he's saying, you actually realize that he's not actually saying anything. He's not presenting an argument, but he's acting like he's winning. And unfortunately for the majority of people who watch a debate who are not probably educated on the topic being debated, they view that as being legitimate, right? It's the confidence. It's like I said, it's posturing.
Well, and it is part of is a legitimate persuasion technique. Like what the whole point of a debate is not just to hash it out with somebody, but to persuade an audience. And
right.
and if you're not posturing to one degree or other, it can look bad. Like I've seen people who aren't very good posturers at all, and they're right, and they're not very good at it, and they don't come off like they're right. So in the defense as well, like you posture too much, right? You can posture way too much. Like that's what James White does as well. But then there's also like there's this happy little medium where you got to be careful how much you're posturing.
There's a particular debate actually with Michael Brown and James White where they're debating Joseph Good and Anthony Buzzard. Topic is the Trinity. And I bring this up because what you just said is important too. So a certain amount of posturing is important because Joseph Good actually presents very valid counter information to what Michael Brown says, but he does it so timidly that if you don't know that what he's saying is correct, you'd think that he might not be correct.
Right.
And then, when contrasted with Michael Brown's, positioning of like, well, I already won this debate, then it really it can seem like Michael Brown is the one who's doing better in that debate. And so in this scenario, I can understand kind of where Courtney's coming from. If that's one of your primary techniques, is that somebody else has pulled out slides and it's like, well, now they look way more professional than me. And that gives me a disadvantage because I didn't prepare that kind of posturing exhibit to make. And I will say that that's where Sean is a very posture-based debater in the opposite way, is that it's not so much his projecting that he is the victor so much as his projecting that he is a scholar, right?
That's a valid point. Right, exactly. And that's exactly kind of what I felt like. You could definitely and it's always fun when you watch a debate on who's the aggressor, right? There's usually one person that's the aggressor and one person that's the deflector. She was definitely the aggressor, 1,000% the aggressor.
Absolutely.
And he was the deflector. Unfortunately, he didn't show her she wasn't able to get a rise out of him until later on. And I think when that started happening, that's when the debate started crumbling. But anyway, back to her rebuttal. One of the things that kind of what made me kind of cringe a little bit was, again, the point of an opening statement is to present positions. And one of the things that she was doing, and I don't know if she intended to do this, she said, remember I challenged him to do this, and I've yet to hear that. And whether she was meaning that to be a standard reminder to the audience of hey, this is what I'm asking for. Let's see if he'll address it. And she does say, I hope he does address this. To be fair, toward the end of her opening of her rebuttal. But the problem was that it's she just kept saying, as I said in my, and he still hasn't, and he still hasn't. And I was like, this isn't the time for that. That's during the cross-examination.
Right.
You know what I mean? And so it comes off like it can make you come off more like an amateur if you do that. And here's the thing is, there's people I love and respect. Dr. Tim Stratton with Free Thinking Ministries, if you're familiar with him. He's the author of Mere Molinism. He debated James White, and he did the same thing to James White. And unfortunately for him, James White is a very experienced debater. And now I think he's, like I said, I think he's posture-based. I think there's a lot of issues with his debate styles. But he did call Stratton out like that I know it was ugh for Stratton, where he's like, that sucks, because you're probably right, you just called me out on that. So she did do that. But those are my two biggest observations from the rebuttal period, was the fact that too much reference to the opening statement, asking him to have addressed your opening statements in his opening statement, which isn't the time for it. And then of course the beginning of the slide debacle.
Right. No, yeah, and I know at the same time in the debate, because I was active in the live chat, most of the chat noticed it too, because there was more than one person who commented in and was like, look, that's not the point of an opening statement, right? The opposing position's job in their opening statement is not to respond to the affirmative position's opening statement. They both independently make their own opening statements. So expecting your opponent to respond to your opening statement in their opening statement just it's not the way that a debate is supposed to go.
Right. And that's where, again, it would have been a great time for Courtney to have called out and been like, in his opening statement, he talked a lot about the order of Melchizedek. He talked a lot about these different things. And just so you know, that none of those things are exclusive to his position. A lot of those very same things could very well be adapted into PSA just fine. Because guess what? People who advocate for PSA, they still believe that he is of the order of Melchizedek, that he is the high priest of heaven. That is something that most believers affirm because of the book of Hebrews. Right. So it was one of the things where I'm like, that would have been a great time. But I don't deny these areas. I deny this particular part of his view. And this is what I'm trying to push, because this is why I think penal substitutionary atonement is biblical. Boom, just you can align yourself where you can align with yourself. And by the way, that looks great to an audience when you align yourself with your opponent where you can, and then say, but this is where we are done. And because we're talking about posturing, the way you are viewed by the audience goes a long way in your persuasive abilities. And if you come off like you're trying to find zero common ground, it just makes you come off like arrogant and prickly. And I don't think people want, and now granted, sometimes there is no common ground, right? And that's fine.
Right. That's true.
But if you're able, do it. And that was my whole thing during that portion. I was like, well, you probably should have aligned yourself with a lot of that, because I think a lot of it is just true. I think the biggest issue is how literal is this high priest of Melchizedek being brought up in the holy place of heaven with Yeshua. I think that would be a better place. But anyway.
Right. And there were points that she attacked in Sean's argument that, like, on the surface, she's correct in the observation, because he did kind of just rattle off a bunch of verses, right, without explanation. And in part, I think he may have intended to explain those a little further, given the time. That's a lot of the reason he uses slides. For instance, one of the references that she made is to Genesis, which, she acknowledged establishes for Sean that sacrifices predate Levi and the Levitical system. But she questions, right? She doesn't try to make an argument, but she at least questions whether or not we can establish the same codified system prior to Levi. And I don't think it's really fair to attack a position that an opponent has not really had the time to explain, because quite frankly, I could explain a defense from that same verse on that position. And this is something that actually divides even the Torah observant movement, is whether or not the Torah predates being given at Sinai. There are a lot of people who believe it does. There are a lot of people who believe it doesn't. I think Courtney falls into the camp that doesn't believe that it predates Sinai, whereas Sean probably falls into the camp that believes that it does. And there are legitimate arguments on both sides. I know where I fall on that. And that's why I say that this verse in particular is one where there actually is a pretty strong argument to be made that it is based on the same system. It just hadn't been relayed and isolated to Levi at the time.
Right. And also, I do want to make sure I mention, speaking of Levi, one of the things that needed to be explained, and where Sean, I think, could have done better in his rebuttal and in the rest of the response, is really actually breaking down the Levitical system. There is a lot of information there, like she referred to it as a guilt offering, that he who has sinned is guilty before God, and therefore they have to commit a sacrifice. And if you've read much on what scholars have said regarding the Levitical system, you'll know that the term sacrifice isn't necessarily the best word in our English vernacular, and it really should be offering. Because when you think sacrifice in the Western vernacular, you think, I'm killing this for a blessing, I'm killing this to please a God, I am sacrificing my flesh or someone else's flesh to save myself. There is but an offering is a gift, is a giving over. And then also the guilt offering should not be understood as guilt, but rather of purification offering. It's not really about guilt. It's actually abysmally translated. There's been plenty of Milgram has talked about this, who is of course Jewish, and then you have all the way to Dr. Michael Heiser, who has also pointed this out. Like, anyone who knows anything about that knows the fact that guilt offering is not a good translation, and it's about purification or purgation, and that means like sanctifying a holy place. And so it doesn't really lend itself to penal substitutionary vibes, so to speak. So I'm going to call that cap.
And well, I love that you brought that up, actually, because, I would say that the sacrificial system is probably one of the most misunderstood aspects about Torah law by not just your average Christian, but even those who are practicing Torah. And it is for reasons like this that it is still very much viewed in a very substitutionary atonement way, where, so I brought this out specifically to read it for this reason. The Schottenstein Interlinear Chumash, right, at the introduction to chapter 4, this is before we even get into any verses and, exegeting any verses rabbinically. The note that they have here, it's quite lengthy. I'm not going to read all of it, but the very beginning of it says, that the Torah is now getting ready to list the offerings that are required to atone for sins. in contrast to the offerings of the previous 3 chapters that a person brings voluntarily in order to elevate himself spiritually. It says, these offerings cannot atone for sins that were committed intentionally. Now, this is a subject that comes up later in the debate, which is ironic, given this fact about them. No offering is sufficient to remove the stain of such sinfulness. That can be done only through repentance and a change of the attitudes that made it possible for the transgression to flout God's will. On the other hand, if the sin was committed accidentally and without intent, no offering is needed. Sin offerings are needed to atone for deeds that were committed inadvertently as a result of carelessness. So very direct purpose to these.
Correct.
And when we take that into account, it actually makes it much harder to fit PSA into the sacrificial system.
Correct. And well, especially when you realize that too, that there's different offerings for different things, right? You have the grain offering, the wave offering. Like, that has nothing to do with punishment. And honestly, I was legitimately disappointed with Sean that he did not press that point more. And it's like,
Right.
okay, the like wave offering where they're waving their offerings back and forth to Hashem and thanking him for his blessing. The first fruits offering, where we're taking the first fruits of the harvest that Hashem has blessed us with, and we are offering it back in thanks. Well, then, okay, now with that mindset, well, what else do we eat? Well, we eat lambs, right? So we eat food. So what do? We bring this and we also offer it to him. But God is spirit, and a lot of times the idea of holiness is this idea of a burning fire, right? I'm a man of unclean lips that have burned his lips. Like, that's is kind of that idea. So what do? To give over meat to God, you burn it. And you thank him for it. And then oddly enough, different types of offerings where the fat was cast aside, or this was fed to them, or it was like a communal thing, like, there's peace offerings, so many different things where those not meant to just be, we're punishing the animal. None of it was viewed as punishing the animal. In fact, It's actually a very recent, more recent interpretation that you're punishing the animal. It was always about giving over something very precious, which what is more precious in an agricultural community than your livestock? Like, just saying.
I will say that, yeah, that was one thing that I was surprised that Sean didn't press harder. Is one thing I did notice in Courtney's argument is that there seems to be a lot of conflation within the sacrificial system between a number of different sacrifices. Now she made the reference we're all familiar with of Yeshua led as a lamb to the slaughter. And at a point in the debate, this is equated in some capacity to Passover. The Passover lamb is not a sin offering. It's a peace offering. So if we're using the sin offering or the guilt offering as the tie to PSA, it doesn't work for us to be using a peace offering in that capacity, right? The analogy has to carry through consistently. The sin offering is a bull.
Passover, like the idea, that she had mentioned, is that it could be passed over. It also could mean transfer. And I'm like, yeah, but that's not the point of the Passover. The Passover, that God's wrath passed over those who are marked. And many people talk about this, but the idea of blood, like a blood oath, is from kind of like an ancient Near Eastern thing. That kind of marks a covenant and marks a covenant people. And people also don't realize this. What was the point of killing the animal? You and I, Marco Poloed about this recently. Every single plague, if anyone knows anything about the plagues, each one of them makes a mockery of a god of Egypt and completely shows Hashem's power over them. And then finally, on the last one, you have Pharaoh, who thinks he's God, one of the gods, right? And not only does Hashem come for the firstborn, but their God, who is over children and life, like the beginning of life and molded children from clay, was a goat or a sheep or a ram. And so that's why Moses originally was like, let us leave Egypt to do these sacrifices, because they're going to be an abomination to you. We're going to be sacrificing your sacred images, because these were considered to be sacred creatures. And then Hashem, fed up with Pharaoh's garbage, goes, take those goats, slaughter them basically before the Egyptians, cover your doorposts with those, and all who are covered by that covenant blood, I will pass over. And so the God who's supposed to create life for children and as a goat basically gets shown to be nothing, and people don't realize that that is a part of the point there. Like you said, it is not in any way an atonement offering at all. That's not even in sight. And then I also wanted to quickly touch on, because she had mentioned as well this idea, and don't worry, we will critique Sean's position more. It's just hers is first, so we're dealing with hers. Don't want anyone
we're getting to Sean's.
I don't want anyone to feel like we're just dogging on Courtney here, because she's actually been very nice to me. She's been fantastic. We've actually had a great conversation. No, like I said, no hard feelings. But then the idea of the sin transference during Yom Kippur is, again, the two goats. I want everyone to notice something about the two goats. There's only one offering that you ever hear anything about sin transference, and it is on the Day of Atonement. And that one that has the sin transferred to it, which everyone understands actually is metaphorical, not literal, takes it out to the wilderness, which, if you know anything about ancient Near Eastern culture and ancient Israel, the wilderness is the place of demons, essentially. That's why it uses the word Azazel, the name Azazel. That's where Beelzebub is. That is where evil is, because that's the pagan nations. That's where these evil deities have control over. So the sin is transferred in the sense that they're saying that this sin does not belong here. Cast it out and let it be back unto the devils. And that's kind of the picture you're getting there, because it's not slaughtered. If it was a sin transferred and then they had to take the punishment, you would kill that goat. But you don't. They cast it out. It gets to live, because it's not about punishing the animal in the place of. It's about purification, taking sin and corruption away from the holy place and casting it out where it belongs.
Yep. And so that's another one that the live chat actually blew up a bit about when it got mentioned, because she did mention it as a means of support for her argument. And I think it was after the previous mention that we just discussed of the Paschal Lamb. And so that's one thing that most everybody noticed right off the bat was like, okay, so like we're conflating three different sacrifices here to build your case and treating them all like they're the same. And that's a problem, because they're not the same. Right.
Well, and that's the problem as well. If you have this idea that death always is punishment, death equals punishment from God, which is a very standard, it's become a very popular idea of from Christianity in the West. Anyone who's familiar with more Eastern Christianity knows that's not the case. Therefore that's why it gets conflated, because something's dying, therefore must be being killed, therefore must be being punished. As opposed to there's other reasons why someone could die or why you might kill an animal.
Yep, we got a comment here from another one of our Hebrew readers. It says Pesach more specifically means to skip, hop, and could be synonymous with avar, which means pass through, crossover. Hence the connection between Pesach and Hebrew. So yeah, Hebrew avar would be the root from where Hebrew comes from.
And so I mean, those are some of my. She also mentions Galatians 3:13 curses every man who hangs on a tree, saying that he took the curse. And this is where I started going, wait, all right. So I heard your redefinition of PSA, right? It's the idea that some form of penalty was taken. Again, if I said before, if it's just a disadvantage of some sort, penalty, no one really would argue with that. It's the idea of PSA being penalty of punishment, right? Then what curse was taken? Right? Who's cursing who? So that's where I'm like, okay, but now your traditional PSA lens felt like it was coming back, unless, of course, you find a way to define that, which I actually thought Sean did a great job at defining what it meant to hang on a tree and why it was cursed, just because you were actually a criminal who committed the crime. Go ahead.
I was going to say, that being the case, let's actually, because this is a great segue into viewing Sean's argument, because this is one where he actually pushed back, and it was a good pushback on this specific point. So let's bring up the video real quick and we'll start it.
By the way, can we real quick address the fact their faces both whenever people are debating, it's funny. Courtney has like this like highly engaged, like constant like smile and like almost like a mildly smug look the entire time. Like, all right, I'm here to wreck your face. And Sean always looks bored. I'm not saying it says anything about either one's character, but it's just really funny. Their game face is totally different.
It is. It's like I said, because both of them use the posturing technique differently, and it's like that immovable object, unstoppable force meeting one another.
It really is. Anyway, it's a hilarious observation. I'm sure when I start doing my formal debates online, people are going to roast me for similar things. It'll be great.
Absolutely.
Sean, your 5-minute rebuttal starts when you speak. You're muted.
That kept
Thank you.
cursing us the
Thank you so
entire
much,
time.
Will. Actually, I pulled up in the studio the scriptures that she's referencing. So this isn't a presentation slide. It's just the scriptures that she's asking me to address. And it is Galatians 3:13 and Jeremiah 24. I don't know if you're going to allow to put that on screen or not, but
That's what you were talking about.
This is one of the biggest crux and underpinnings of the PSA argument is, well, I'll just read it since we're not going to be allowed to show it anymore.
Notice
Deuteronomy 22:22-23 is a man has committed a sin worthy of death and he is executed. You hang his body in a tree. You must not leave the body on the tree overnight. You must be sure to bury him that day, because anyone who is hung on a tree is under God's curse. You must not defile the land that the Lord your God has given you as an inheritance. So the reason why that this is, and of course, Galatians 3:13 says, Christ redeemed us from the curse of the law by becoming a curse for us, for it's written, cursed is everyone who hangs on a tree. The reason why this is a comparative statement to some people, to people he's already taught the law to in Galatia, and not saying that Christ literally deserve the cross and that the Torah does not literally prescribe death by cross, is because the person in Deuteronomy who was, i.e., already killed, he's already killed, and then his dead body is hung on a cross. His body is not hung on the tree or hung by the tree to death. He's already killed for the punishment, and then his body is shown as a sign to the community that God's justice is intact and that you will be punished even with capital punishment. So again, it's using a quick reference to something in the law to talk about how Christ received punishment for us. He metaphorically, it's a metaphor pulling from something in the law for Christ's obedience unto death. But there is no prescription anywhere in the Torah that the Father accepts any human blood, much less a human sacrifice, much less prescription of death by cross, in order for any form of atonement to be made. So I am a little baffled that my opponent would say I didn't present anything from the Bible or from scriptures that talks about an active, ongoing priest in heaven doing priestly duties in the temple, when I not only laid out the foundation for what the Father required for a temple, its furniture, utensils, and requirements, but also for a man and what they do according to Scripture. And so, yeah, so if we have a son of man who's been prophesied to come and be a high priest, then yes, after he's dead, that's when his priestly appointment happens, when he's ascending to heaven. This is what all the New Testament tells us. So this is why I try to put on the screen all these things to kind of run through as quick as possible. A couple notes on some of Courtney's opening statements that I wanted to put forward is that, Courtney, I'm sure we're going to get into it, but she mentioned that the lens of her view, her specific view goes through the Garden of Eden and the sacrifices per the law. And I agree. Isaiah 53 is right, and metaphorically comparing Yeshua to a guilt offering. But that doesn't literally make him an actual sacrifice that's accepted in a temple manner by the Father for atonement. He would have no reason to become a high priest forever if all that propitiation was already completed. The propitiation, by definition of the Torah, is through a temple with a priest under all the right requirements. Yeshua and the Father's house in heaven fulfills all those requirements perfectly post-resurrection. And so that's why I would strongly disagree with the hermeneutical lens by which Courtney is somehow, I haven't really heard her lens and how she does that. She also believes that the punishment in Christ has gained better access to the Father. I put on screen Hebrews 5:7-10, which directly, in my opinion, would refute that idea that it was his obedience that gained him his priesthood. And yes, he learned obedience by what he suffered, but it wasn't the punishment that was intended specifically, like again, because the Father doesn't require punishment of a human by torturous death on the cross at the hands of his enemies in order for atonement to be made. That's not the process for atonement. What gained him access to the first resurrection, which gave him his new incorruptible body that allowed him in Hebrews 4:14 and 15 to ascend through the heavens to the temple in heaven, is the first resurrection body. So if we're talking literal access, he needed the right body. If we're talking spiritual access, he needed the right heart. And so he showed that right heart through
30
obedience. Also, it seems as if she is using the animal substitution concept in scripture, as far as like an animal's brought forward in the law, and she's using that to say that was a substitution, and then compares it to Christ's death as a substitution. But the animals that were brought forth in law is not all animals for substitution for atonement and for offerings. I mean, you had sometimes grain and wine, and it wasn't specifically this idea that the animal alone. It was a process of a bunch of things. Like I said before, even sometimes when the right animal was brought, the offering wasn't accepted because the heart was wrong. And so, thank you.
Sorry.
All right.
So yeah, he does a good job at pushing back to a degree, but then there's things that just make me still twitch a little bit. But okay, first off, his whole point is that he takes that idea of the high priest being extremely literal with Jesus to the point of where he is in the heavenly places, in a heavenly temple, doing sacrifices right now. Or at least during the holidays, right? Or like, whatever, but according to the calendar, so to speak, not maybe right now, but then he says that the guilt offering was this idea metaphorically placed on Jesus. And throughout the rest of the debate, he says all these other things are metaphorical pictures. And this is where I was going, Courtney, it's right there. Go for the jugular. Because she really takes issue with his position that Yeshua is committing sacrifices in heaven to animals, which I understand because there's also presumption that animals are even in heaven. There's a lot of presumptions that are being made there. But the weapon there is, why is it then? Because he kept asking her throughout the debate, can you show me when the idea of priesthood changed? When did the laws and the duties of a priest in the priesthood change from Old Testament to New Testament? Can you show me when those ever changed? No, then therefore he must be still doing what a high priest does. Strong argument. Until you start saying that all the other language regarding Yeshua's death and burial and resurrection was all metaphorical. Like, he metaphorically connects him to guilt offering, metaphorically connects him to first fruits, he metaphorically connects him to, then why is it not metaphorical to when it's calling him a high priest in heaven in the holy places? There's also a hermeneutical shift that's happening there for people who aren't paying attention to it.
Right. It's it's funny that something very similar happened in the debate that I moderated this past Sunday. Where it's kind of like, I'm going to hold you to this standard, but not myself to this standard, and the one interlocutor was accusing the other of taking literally names that are titles, and then in the very next breath insisting that names that are titles are in fact literal. It was a whole thing. I'll end up doing a whole review of that debate also. But this is kind of a very similar scenario where it's like, well, no, what you're talking about are metaphors. What I'm talking about is literal. And that's and like you said, that's a gut punch right there. If you can actually spot it on sight and go, okay, why is it metaphor when I'm using it, but not metaphor when you're using it?
Right. Why is your position the one that needs to be taken literally here and not mine?
Right.
So that was a blunder, and that's a blunder in his position. I still think it's a blunder. I think it's a giant hole in his position, honestly. And so that's why I said this debate was really interesting for me as a guy who's like, I have zero dogs in this fight.
Right.
So it allows me to be a little bit more objective. Also, when he says like, oh, I presented all these things and I'm just baffled. That is right where I would say, I originally thought it was during the cross-examination that things started going wrong. I originally thought it was Courtney who originally started getting condescending and causing a problem when I first was moderating. But now when I rewatched, I was like, oh wait, no, I think this is where the bad blood began, because he instantly acts offended, right? I'm just baffled that you would even say that, as opposed to go, no, I did address these, just be professional. These are my positions on those. So maybe you misunderstood my point, but X, Y, Z. Because one of the things I do like is that Sean, he doesn't like raise his voice a lot. He kind of he stays like at a very even tone. But one thing that Sean does that is the fact that he kind of will make those jabs like that subtly throughout, and it can definitely get under an opponent's skin if you're not careful. And so that was something I didn't like right out. Now that I've watched, I was like, okay, that's actually where I think the bad blood began in the debate, because if anyone knows, the rest of the debate becomes a cat fight later on. So
yes,
I eventually just had to be like, all right, shut up, we're moving on. Also, you'll notice that in that rebuttal, he mentioned the slides and his discontentment with the situation like 3 times. And that instantly was like, okay, dude, you already know your interlocutor doesn't seem to appreciate it. Just move on, be professional, right? Like, and I took that responsibility. It's like, I didn't even think about it. That didn't cross my mind. I have no problem with slides when people use them, so I didn't think it's a big deal. I said that even in the debate later, and then they kept wanting to fight over why they should, why they shouldn't. So we see that. I was just like, Sean, move on. Like, and then what was it? There was more when it came to the high priest situation, but now it's escaping me. So
I don't know why I just brought that back up.
No, you're good. What were your thoughts on that in his rebuttal?
No, definitely along the same lines. Now he does speak very direct and kind of a monotone, very pointed, very emotionless, and at times that can be a very good thing. But when the only time that you do show any kind of emotion in what you're saying is when you're going to make a statement like, well, I'm baffled that my opponent would, it's like, okay, well, yeah, that was a jab that probably wasn't expected, appreciated, or necessary.
Because what it does is he's undercutting, right? It sounds like he's undercutting character there. Right.
And it may have been anticipation of, because they are both very similar, but in such different ways. Because if you watch any of his debates, he will do stuff like that. Like he'll make those kind of jabs. Whereas Courtney doesn't make those kind of jabs so much as she just talks down to your position, right? Like it's stupid to believe that position. And so it's not exactly an ad hominem, but it's just shy of being an ad hominem.
Well, it's so actually that's one of the things I wanted to address, because she kept saying like, he's slitting animal throats in heaven, and she just say it like it's an absurd claim. And even though I agree, I was like, yeah, I don't think that's, I'm with you on that one, Courtney. I don't feel like she did a good job at presenting why it's absurd. Right. But here's what's funny. If you notice this part of the debate, this is where the debate also shifts away from penal substitution. It's not about penal substitution. This debate is not about penal substitution at all. Like no. Because what happens is that you can tell that Courtney really has issues with his position. She wanted to debate him on this position, so she wanted to take the affirmative that penal substitution was true. So what she does is she just decides that a good defense is a good offense. So she just goes and attacks his position. She really has beef with this position, and she wants to keep putting it down, right? This is ridiculous. It's dumb. Why are you doing this? And Sean really doesn't seem all that interested in fully responding to PSA either, because he a lot of times says he wants to park on the priesthood constantly. Which right. I get, because there's legitimate things to talk about there, but he never showed it in a way I felt where he really showed how his position destroys PSA.
Right.
So it felt like it's weird, because I felt like a script got flipped where because he's supposed to be attacking PSA and her defending it, right? She's taking affirmative, he's taking negative. And then what ends up happening is there's like Sean Levitical atonement theory, and then you have him defending and her attacking. And I was like, what is happening right now? This is not the debate that we were supposed to be having.
Right. It became more about attacking Sean's position than defending PSA. And I think I think probably a lot of that could be because even within his opening statement, and then also his rebuttal that we just watched, right? There was more of a defense for his position than presenting why PSA is wrong, right? It wasn't really disproving PSA so much as trying to just submit an alternative that I think is a better alternative, and that, like, that's cool, but you're there to prove one side wrong, so like stick to that, prove that side wrong, and I think that he even in this endeavor of defending his own position, to start with, I think probably a precedence of the how to word this to start with a precedence of the priesthood in its mirroring what is in heaven would have been the best way to begin. Instead of just submitting the position, maybe begin by laying the foundation for that position, because that would have been a much stronger position to argue from. The idea that, look, God told Moses, okay, build it according to the picture that I've shown you. So Moses clearly saw what the temple in heaven looks like. There's a number of other, we're even told, right, that all of the temple processes are a shadow of the things that are to come.
Right.
So there has to be some level of relation. And I think that was probably one of the weaker points that could have been attacked in Courtney's rebuttal to it. Is she seemed to be, she didn't want to take a hard position on it, but she very much wanted everybody else to be questioning any relation between the two.
Right. Well, and one of the other things I wanted to make sure I mentioned was as far as where another swing and miss happens which is why you could tell it wasn't about attacking PSA, which was his flippant use of the word propitiation. So the word propitiation is oftentimes, it's really only found in the New Testament, translated really, and that's the Greek term hilasterion or hilasmos. I've talked about this on your program before, and but it's the idea of mercy seat, the place of atonement, or propitiation, which means to satisfy an angry deity, and that never gets fleshed out, like the nuance there.
Right.
When the New Testament uses propitiation, it uses it as a noun, not a verb. So a noun would be a place, like a mercy seat, not an action, like a verb, like a satisfaction of angry deity. So that's an important, and I was like, that was a swing and a miss. And then also I never felt like they properly dealt with what is atonement, which is kippur. It's like, there are two ways to take it, and both I think have biblical merit. Kippur being the most simple one, which is to cover, which is of course like we see the first time used on the ark when it covers covering the ark with pitch. So this idea of a covering of your covering over your shame and getting new clothes for the king, and which we see that's a continual theme throughout the Torah and the prophets. But then there's also, the root is it from the Akkadian word meaning to wipe or to cleanse, and so neither one of those deal with satisfaction of an angry deity, nor does it deal with someone having to incur a punishment for any form of satisfaction or to endure any form of curse. So in the Hebraic mind, I don't think there's any justification for her position. And it was one of those things where it's like screaming at me the entire time. And this is, by the way, anyone who's argumentative and loves this type of stuff, this is where moderation becomes very, very difficult.
Yes.
Because you have to shut your mouth and you're like, no, and you're just like internally screaming, but you're like, keep it cool, man. You got to be a professional.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, no, Sunday was a difficult day for me. There were so many points where it was like, and you want to speak and you're like, this is not my fight.
Right. This isn't my debate. I'm the mediator.
My job is to be impartial. Oh, but I think probably one of the biggest weaknesses, and this would have been something again that would have been an absolute haymaker if Courtney had grabbed hold of it, because it Sean's position in a way gives her the bat to beat him with, and that is that it is still predicated on the basis of the sacrificial system being substitutionary atonement. Just not here on earth. Now, the location has changed. That's the only thing that's changed.
Yep.
And
Pretty
it's,
much.
you know, and that I think is why you and I are in agreement when we say, look, there's like his view can technically still fit into PSA.
Right.
You know, is because it's still predicated on the same foundation that PSA itself is built on, which is a misunderstanding of the purpose of the sacrificial system.
Correct. And that's where for me it's like, well, yeah, and if it's like, okay, well then, and because no one ever addressed this. And Sean never addressed this either. Why did Yeshua have to die? Because he's like, well, no, it's his obedience, not his death. But he never addressed why he had to die. Courtney's position at least has an answer. I disagree with the answer, but it has an answer.
Right.
He never really answers that. And so he just talks about, again, his obedience and him as a high priest. And it basically talks about just like obedience to death.
So
But why did he have to die? Anyway.
I will say this because I was listening to it again last night. And I decided, okay, so a lot of what both of them are talking about here is discussed in Hebrews. So let's just go to Hebrews and open up and start reading as we're listening. And he does give, I don't think it's necessarily a very good answer, but he gives an answer as to why Yeshua had to die, which is essentially because it was prophesied that he would. Right. And so it's like, okay, so, and even if we read Hebrews, right, Hebrews pretty much agrees with that position, is that it was prophesied that he would, so he did, but Hebrews 9 in particular is one that I think both of them could have used, but both of them didn't use because Hebrews chapter 9 is cancer to both of their positions.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's, yeah. Also, by the way, Charlie Tell Mood Factory down there says, I don't agree with either of them. However, I will say Sean is better behaved than his opponent. I have talked to Sean before and he was kind to me. And I'll say this. He was kind to me too. I still have no qualms with him, but I'm actually, so this whole part is supposed to be constructive. I think I mentioned that at the beginning, constructive criticism, like flesh out your positions better or shift them. That's okay. Just in general, I felt like, Hebrews definitely, like you said, it kind of fleshes that out a little bit in a further details. And I don't think either one of their positions became abundantly clear. And I think there's a lack of precision. It almost made me wonder to a degree if, and I mean this with no amount of like hatred or like I'm better than you mentality or anything like that. But I was like, were these two yet qualified to have a fleshed out discussion regarding this topic? Because when it comes to a lot of things that Sean could have brought up against Courtney's position, that very obvious ones weren't brought up. And then Courtney, the same thing, where it's like, okay, there's a lot of, you would have been more precise if you knew the differences between some of these things. Because there's people who do know the differences between those things, and they still hold the penal substitutionary atonement.
Right.
And they can actually argue it for much more precisely. See Dr. William Lane Craig. I read his book. I wasn't impressed because I just don't believe it's true. And there's things I had issues with in his book, but he does a very good job at arguing for his position in it. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So I don't know. I don't mind that may sound more condescending than I wanted it to sound, but the point is, I'm just like, I'm not sure if we studied this out enough to be able to have that conversation.
Right. Yeah. No. I will say that there's something to that, and I've gotten involved in debates myself where it wasn't until I was in the debate that I realized that I probably wasn't really prepared to talk about all of the specifics of that topic, because I didn't know all of the specifics. I hadn't familiarized myself with all of the angles, which my opponent did. And I'll say, like, they made a better argument than I was able to make at that point. And that is due to my own ignorance. Now, I'd probably give it another go now that I have had the time to look over all of the other angles at it. So we'll see if maybe that happens in the future. But yeah, I definitely understand the concern. Matter of fact, there was even a level of concern voiced to me by not many, but a handful of people over, again, the debate that I just moderated. It was like people would reach out and be like, look, are either of these people really qualified to discuss the depth of this topic? And that's the point where, you know, of course, in that debate, and if you go watch it, it's I think it went decent. You know, there were times where it turned into a bit of a dumpster fire, but all debates do at some point for a brief period.
That's actually what, let's be honest, that's what a lot of people are there for the debate. They want to see
the flames.
Yeah, they do. They're just like, let it burn. You know, there's a few people, very few people who are like, no, I want to hear the arguments. I'm making diagrams. I'm one of the people with the diagrams. Like, no, stop fighting. I want to know things.
Right. And so one of the interlocutors does have a master's degree in biblical studies. The other one is, you know, like myself, who is primarily self-taught and hasn't had any formal education in theology. And
that explains why you're dumb.
That right. That's why Seamus is the brains of this operation.
With a beard like that, buddy, you're going anywhere you want. You're fine.
Right. That's
going,
and that's the main thing. This like I always say, this gives me plus 15 in wisdom points. So, you know, roll for initiative. But yeah. That being said, though, I do think that the interlocutors were relatively evenly matched, and I would say the same for this debate. Actually, I think Sean and Courtney were pretty evenly matched in spite of or because of some of the lack of familiarity with all of the specifics of the topic that we just talked about. It's one thing to have two people who know it inside out discussing with one another, and it's another thing to have people who are only tentatively familiar with it discussing it with one another. Either way, it's evenly matched.
Right, which is why actually one of the areas, again, with Sean, where he kind of missed the boat. So he talked about God not accepting human sacrifices, which is true. So Hashem does not accept human sacrifices, in full agreement there. He also talks about, you know, the cross issue, which I'm like, yep, I am in agreement. But one thing he never really gets into is it really okay to punish the innocent in the place of the guilty?
Right.
And Ezekiel 18 addressed this. She has addressed this with me particularly on TikTok, where she thinks that Ezekiel 18 is basically about the future. So when she parallels that with Jeremiah 31 and saying that's the new covenant, so therefore this is when the basically the restored creation happens. This is the future, that the Son will not be punished for the deeds of the Father, and the Father for the deeds of the Son. And my biggest problem already with that, because she is a Torah keeper. You are a Torah keeper. I'm like half in, half out.
Getting your feet wet.
Yes, I'm like, my current position is just like, okay, I think Acts 15 makes a Noahic law case for Gentiles, but it also does not discourage the rest of the Torah keeping. But I'm also like everyone knows this. I'm like very open to it, and very much like, well, it doesn't hurt to just do it. So, like, whether you think
God's
so or
not going to curse you for it.
Right. Like, it's like God's not going to punish you for not eating bacon. Okay. Like, it's okay. Anyway. So, but she's a Torah keeper. And so using the Ezekiel 18 as future doesn't quite jive with me, because the whole point of Torah keeping is that God's law never changes, because that would mean that he changes. So therefore, if it's that way in the future, where the Father will not be punished for the deeds of the Son because it's unjust, then why would it be also now or in the past? And then on top of that, it's like, okay, but then there's plenty of other scriptures outside of Ezekiel 18 that uses very plain language that says, you know, so whose sin shall die. I will, you know, when Moses is like, hey, well, if you punish all of Israel, aren't you? And he's interceding on Israel's behalf. And he's like, hey, look, these other nations will say that you visited the sin of the fathers unto the son and unto the next generations, and blah, 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 blah. Please don't do that. And it says that God, like, you know, shifts from what he was going to do. And it's like, there's a lot of areas in scripture that talk about not punishing the innocent in the place of the guilty. And I felt like he never quite got to that, because even though, yes, human sacrifice was not, but if you understand PSA, you also understand there's this idea that he had to be punished or take a penalty of some sort for mankind, even though he was innocent. Okay, well, now you have to talk about, is that right? And then don't even get me started on the Isaiah 52 and 53 conversation. We're going to get started. I'm sorry. I'm ranting, Brad. I apologize.
Hold on. Wait, I've got something for that.
Okay, go.
Hold on. Where is it?
Wait for it. I'm waiting.
Okay, go.
That brings me so much joy. I almost have a tear. Okay, so Isaiah 52 and 53. So Isaiah is composed. It is not talking about the suffering servant being punished in the place of everyone else. It is not talking about punishment at all in that entire passage. The whole point of bearing with somebody. Brad, have you ever suffered before?
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
sure you have. Yeah, of course.
We're human.
Right. Okay. So I'm going to guess that you have suffered through some things, and Seamus has been your buddy through it, right?
Oh, yes.
Yes. Okay. Did he bear your burden with you?
Yes.
Okay. Did he receive your burden literally?
No.
No. So he bore your burden. So in other words, he came alongside you and bore your burden. So
Yes.
when Yeshua bore our sins and our iniquities, does that mean they were transferred to him? No, he bore them. And so Isaiah is composed of 4 songs. Anyone who knows this knows that. And Isaiah 52, 53, that entire section is about Israel. And it's like the onlookers looking at how Israel is suffering, right? And now with that lens, actually, you can see how Yeshua really plays a great parallel with the prophecy. But it's funny because in Matthew chapter 7, we see how we're supposed to interpret that entire passage. When he healed people in the New Testament, what did it say? And he's like, this is to fulfill what the prophet said, that he bore our sicknesses and healed our diseases. Bearing our sickness, when he healed people, he did not bear them and have them transferred to him. Just like when he bore our sins, he did not have them transferred for him. JD made the great point, is because the Hebrew says because of, not for. Or on behalf of. And I say this all the time. You keep your for language. I could die for you without being your substitute. A soldier dies for people, but it's not their substitute. It's a heroic death. That's why we find martyrs to be such powerful witnesses, because they died for the cause, not in the place of the cause. So this whole thing, Isaiah 53, absolutely drives me crazy when people keep using that as like a penal lens, when Matthew 7 absolutely tells you how the New Testament is actually interpreting that, which is the idea of bearing with and healing. It's all about lifting mankind up to God, those who are suffering, and healing them despite being surrounded by enemies. So those who are faithful to Hashem are going to be surrounded by their enemies, and he lifts them up and he bears their sins with him and he heals them. Hence the resurrection, hence the new creation, hence why we partake in the resurrection, and he is the first fruits of that resurrection. It's just this parallels. End rant. I'm done. I'm okay.
All right. Capping that there.
Yep.
No, but yeah, and I think that actually fits in pretty well with the whole synopsis of Hebrews 9, which, like I said, kind of works against both of them in a little bit. I got to reading it and I'm like, okay, all of the places where like she might reference the necessity for Yeshua dying, right, that are spoken about here. It's like, well, yeah, they all say that he has to die because the prophet said that he had to die. None of them say that he had to die for sins, right? One of them does mention that repentance of sin would be a result of this, but it doesn't say that it was for that purpose.
Correct.
While at the same time, Hebrews 9 also references the entire temple system and the sacrificial system, and basically says, yeah, that's for this world, not the world to come. So it kind of destroys Sean's point in that capacity also. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I think probably both of them could have maybe done a little better to reference that passage, especially as it ties into the Isaiah 53 as you've just presented it, which was beautiful, by the way.
I'm here to serve.
Oh, goodness.
But
I don't want to keep you too much longer. I had hoped that we're long-winded and we talk a lot. I wanted to get into some of their cross-examination questions back and forth. But that might go another entirely too long. So we can probably cut it here, man, and I can do that independently, or if you want to come back on at like a later date down the road, we'll just
let me know when you're doing it. If I could join you, I will. I did want to make sure I mentioned a couple of things real fast as well, and anyone who's observing. Sorry, do you have to go right away?
No.
Oh, okay,
not at all.
Cool. All right, cool. Because one of the things that as well, it kind of gets into a spitting match mid-debate. I actually thought the opening statements were pretty well done. Despite like I said, I thought actually Courtney's was really well done. Sean's was long-winded, but I was like, this is actually really good. I kind of wanted him to keep going. But it's right once they start interacting with each other that you start to see the slow descent, and then finally it just crashes into madness. And what ends up happening, and this is where I feel like Sean really kind of, even though like she was becoming very pointed and direct and punchy, this is where I felt like there was a hypocritical moment, pretty harshly on his part. First off, remember, this is the guy who said right off the bat, I'm baffled that my opponent would even do this.
Right.
Then he goes in the middle, it's like, yep, by the way, I want to address the audience real fast. This happens every time I debate. And he does this moment where he reframes the debate. And by the way, framing is powerful.
Yes.
Framing is powerful if you know how to frame properly. And he starts framing and says, this happens all the time. My opponents just do this and this and this and this. And, woe is me, kind of like, this is just what it is. These people just can't answer me. And I'm just the little victim here who is always misrepresented. And then when Courtney pushes back and like slides in a few other spots, he's like, we should have prepared better. Stop playing the victim. And I'm not going to lie, I almost interjected because at this point I was like, oh my goodness. Like, okay, you're not in a position, right? Because you've also done this up to this point. So the whole general idea, now Sean and Courtney, if you watch this, which I'm sure it'll make its rounds, that is always just a bad look. Don't reframe to the audience. Okay. The audience isn't blind. I say this all the time. Like I try to think that my audience is smart, right? And they can see what's going on. So if you think that they're misrepresenting you, just say, I think that's a misrepresentation or you're misunderstanding me. But because there's less, you could tell they weren't so interested in listening to each other. Like there's a moment in the debate where Sean goes, oh, that's what you're saying. It's toward the end of the open discussion. And then they're like, oh, well, finally, we're going to get into this. And I was like, it's time. But if you'd taken the time to ask questions to just get clarification, you probably could have gotten to a more fruitful discussion sooner and avoided the petty back and forth and the pedantic little jabs. You know what I'm saying?
It really, I think people misunderstand the purpose of the question period, right? A lot of people treat the question period like this is your chance to try and get a gotcha moment within 3 questions. When the wisest thing to do with that period is to try and learn more about your opponent's position so that and I always quote Jordan Peterson when I say this, but like the point is that you should be able to repeat their position to them in such a way that they agree with it and say, yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. Because now you know that you understand them and can adequately attack that position.
Right. Which is why there's an opening statement. And then there's a rebuttal to the opening statements. Like I think this is wrong. I think this is wrong. Okay. Now we have cross-examinations for you to ask your clarification questions. Because now that you've heard your position attacked, now you can ask your clarification. Once you get to the cross-examination, then we get to open dialogue. You guys can actually have a very good, solid back and forth. And now sometimes you can use the question time to get a gotcha, but that's usually if you're asking questions that are relevant, right? You should be asking questions for clarification. Okay, now based on your answers, if this is what you mean here and this is what you mean here, is that correct? Yes. Then how do you justify this? And that could be your gotcha moment and also be your clarification moment, right?
Yes.
That could serve as either one. So when you're just kind of fleshing out these debates a little bit, you can start seeing that where some of the holes are. And by the way, none of us are perfect. We're all going to screw up in debates. I'm not going to be perfect. Like there's debates where I'm like, yep, I definitely did well on that one. And there's others I'm like, yeah, kind of swung and missed on that. In fact, you've been on our channel for 2 different debates. Your first one is baptism required for salvation. You were like, yeah, that wasn't a very good debate. I didn't perform very well in that.
I did not like the way I performed in that one.
You like said it like right away. Like you're like, yeah, not my best. And then the Torah debate came up, and you and Seamus were like Gatling guns. And I was like, dang, like this is like, you could tell the difference. And that's also the thing. There's differences in wheelhouse, and you might feel like you've studied something for a while until you realize that, ooh, I actually haven't studied this as well as I thought.
That's a deeper well than I thought it was.
Yep. Hello. And that's when you just go, and this is when you want to also talk about credibility as an interlocutor. Just go, you know what? I actually haven't looked into that very well. So, or I don't know that part very much. I want to say this because of this reason, but I'm actually not exactly sure. So as of right now, I'm not, I'll just say, I think this is my opinion on the matter, but I'm not sure yet.
Right.
Go ahead.
It's never a bad thing to say, look, I can't speak to that. My initial response would probably be something to the nature of X, but I'll probably have to get back to you on that.
Right. Exactly. The people go, okay, moving on. Because I mean, no one expects you to know everything anyway, right? Like so, and that's why you. Some people they avoid that type of situation by just being on the attack the entire time.
Well, there are some debaters who are only looking for gotcha moments.
Right.
It's not really about having an edifying conversation or changing people's minds, which and to that, most people accept that you're not going to change your interlocutor's mind in a debate anyway.
Correct.
So, why not just look for gotcha moments? But, I think it's always worth trying in some little way, at least making an effort to have a decent conversation. But if all you're looking for is gotcha moments, it limits how edifying the conversation can be.
Right, exactly. And that's why I think having a non-hostile debate is the best. But I mean, there are probably times where search and destroy is necessary, right? There are definitely times where it's like, okay, you're acting this way. I've been playing nice with you, but now the gloves are coming off. And I definitely think that we kind of saw a moment where that happened in the debate. And that's why I said, like, I didn't have a dog in this fight with Sean or Courtney. They've both been very polite to me. And I just think that there were some major swings and misses. But at the same time, I think it did, like, I actually got a lot of positive feedback from my audience. And it was funny because I wasn't sure if I would. Because I was like, that kind of got really, really petty. But it was funny because we had done so much discussion throughout the channel that the audience was like, hey, I actually really appreciated that because it showed me where my holes were a little bit. And then, or I also started noticing where other people's presuppositions were coming into the debate. And I started seeing where they were missing each other. And that's what I started noticing. Because really what was happening here, not only were we more concerned with Sean's position than we were with PSA, but there was a lot of talking past each other because there's presupposed definitions in certain areas. Like the sacrificial system never got properly fleshed out. Other things weren't properly fleshed out enough to even have a real good debate on the topic. That's why I think it devolved into the spat toward the end that it did. Yes,
I 100% agree. But no, yeah, and I definitely can agree. Having watched the path that your channel has taken, and by the way, I've referenced a lot of people to it when they ask me about this particular topic because I'm like, look, they have got a lot of work invested into explaining this topic. So rather than write you a book here and now, he's writing one.
Very fair.
Go check him out.
Now I will say this though, because I know that the Torah observant community is very split on the nature of the Trinity and all that. Like Christology is a big debate in that world. It's actually kind of fascinating for me as like a paleo Orthodox Christian, like I kind of peek my head over once in a while. I'm like, wow, that got crazy over there. Then I put my head back. Wow, that was a weird position. But
Look at him go.
Yeah, it's literally me. I'm just like, wow, just. So my book though is coming from, now just so everyone's aware of your people. Now it deals a lot with the sacrificial system. It kind of fleshes a lot of that out, but it does come from the angle of Jesus being the incarnation. So I do take an incarnation route here, but I do think that even those who would quibble about my Christology will find a good portion of that book edifying still. So
Right.
Anyway, I just want to make sure I clarified that since you send people my way. Heads up, Torah community, that's where I'm at.
Right.
Don't come screaming at me in the I had recently a guy in the comments section be like, so you teach the Trinity heresy? I was like, oh, great. Okay, well, we got some spillover in the bucket.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, unfortunately, that's another habit that has to be broken in the Torah community. We've got a laundry list of our own problems, but I would say the number one biggest one is this idea that if anybody accepts any doctrine that I don't agree with, then nothing that they have to say has value. And it's like, no, guys, like, you can be right about more than one thing, which, at the root of this really is a lot of their position on Orthodox Judaism, right? It's the Torah community, by and large, still, as a majority, writes off Orthodox Judaism and any opinions that they have on anything because of this same argument. It's this, well, they didn't accept that Jesus was the Messiah, so they're wrong about everything. And it's like, guys, we've got to get over that, right? There's some very smart Trinitarians who accept the idea that Jesus is the incarnation, and they have a lot of great things to say about baptism, substitutionary atonement, eschatology. Like, these are all different subjects, and that's probably my favorite thing to say to people, right? Is when they're like, well, they believe in the Trinity, or the Jews don't believe that Jesus is the Messiah. And I just go, yeah, but that's just one subject.
Well, I've definitely had that. I'm like, well, the Judaic understanding is blah, blah, blah. That the people are like, well, they don't believe Messiah. I'm like, okay. So they got, I'm obviously a Christian. So I'm like, I think that Yeshua is Messiah. So I think they're wrong in that area. It doesn't mean that, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater here, folks. Like, and who's that author who wrote Paul the Letter Writer? Seamus.
Tim Hegg. Tim Hegg, the letter writer?
Yeah. And it's funny because, like, even Seamus is like, yeah, I don't agree with everything with that guy, but I wouldn't want to debate him. Like,
oh, yeah, no. Yeah. I mean, he's a Trinitarian, but I wouldn't want to debate him.
Right, exactly. So it's one of those things where it's like, yeah, the mudslinging, that's already happened in the comments already. Like, oh, they believe this and this and this. And I'm like, all right, I'm not here to argue Christology. I actually told them that Christology will not be a part of the debate. That's not a subject in the debate. I don't want to get into it with the debate because for those who don't know, I serve as in ministry at churches, and I'm a pastor. And so for me personally, I'm like, look, I get enough flack for just being friendly to Torah keeping community alone. I'm like over here, like, can we at least like keep it easy on this area, because this is like a landmine. Like, and even in the Christian circles, you get into that topic and it can get very hairy very quickly. There's a reason why there's that hilarious video that everyone quotes, that's modalism, Patrick, because literally even Christians get themselves all sorts of tied up in knots on the topic. So it's just, yep. Eventually I could do a Christology debate, but it has to be a dedicated Christology debate. And that's period.
Right. That being said, actually, just to draw this back to the debate here real quick, that is something that Sean said. Now, Courtney denied it, but as I view, as watching the debate, he said maybe our views on eschatology have something to do with our interpretations here, something to that nature. Mm-hmm. That's more or less true, right? If you view eschatology in terms of us not receiving physical bodies that are perfected bodies and us being purely spiritual beings, then one view would take precedence over the other. Like your how you view eschatology is inherently going to affect the way that you understand either Sean's or Courtney's position.
Correct. And actually, like, my eschatology shifted once I shifted my understanding of the atonement. I realized, like, oh wait, Oh, so that doesn't, none of that other stuff makes sense then in this framework. Or what really happened for me was I started seeing the parallels that were actually being drawn. And I'm like, oh, this is really talking about the new kingdom. This is talking about restored creation. This is talking about restored bodies, the first fruits of resurrection in your glorified body. And it's not talking about a spirit. It's talking about the physical resurrections that we're all going to partake of. So anyway, I find it really, it's been fascinating. It's a fun conversation. It was a fun debate, but it was definitely, it was passionate. That's a good word for it.
Very good word for it. It got very passionate. And it calmed down towards the end, I will say.
It did. And it seemed like they parted as friends at the end.
Right, or at least peacefully and on good terms, and I was happy to see that. Actually, I was happy to see that. Okay, so like they could get a little rough with one another and then calm down at the end and be like, all right, we're cool.
Right.
That shows a level of maturity on both of their parts that is admirable.
Right, absolutely. And so I did appreciate that. There's a lot of things I appreciate about the debate. I actually wrote a couple notes down I was like, I should probably address that in my book. That's really good. So not all of it was bad. I'm just letting you know my personal critiques and my thoughts as they were going through it, because the areas that were good, I think are very obvious. And I think the parts that might not have been so obvious, like I actually had people go like, I had a young guy text me who goes to my church, like, I listened to that debate and I got to say, like, I feel like there's something's wrong here, but I can't put my finger on it. And so I hope we were able to help show you where maybe some of those things happened. And perhaps I'm wrong. Like I may have misquoted something here. I might have not caught a detail. And if so, then feel free to let me know. I'd be happy to redact any statement that is unfactual.
Absolutely. And for everybody watching, I'll go ahead and close it out here now. Definitely go and subscribe to and watch the content that Will's channel has, The Church Split. They've got amazing content, especially on this topic. They've put a lot of time and effort into studying, researching, and presenting a concise and well-rounded view on this topic. So I highly recommend it. I've been following all of the videos they've been putting out on it, and they've all been spectacular so far. So I only expect that to continue because, Will is just an awesome guy.
Right back at you. If I'm going to recommend anyone to heretics, it'll be you guys.
We appreciate that.
For anyone who doesn't know me, by the way, that's like a running gag on our channel. Like Brian opens up with "What's up, heretics?" So I'm not actually like yelling at anybody. So
Yep.
Making sure.
Oh, but that being said, guys, I probably won't be doing an after partes tonight because it's already late and I do have work early tomorrow. But definitely catch us. I think the next topic that Seamus and I will be discussing is Kabbalah. We'll be doing an introduction to just generically what that is and what it's about. So it'll be a fun time and cool topic. Again, he's moving a lot. He's got a lot going on. Not sure exactly when that'll drop, but possibly this Sunday. We'll see. That being said, hope you all have a wonderful night. Will, my friend, L'chaim.
L'chaim.